Today on Toy Habits, we are reviewing the G.I. Joe Classified series Gung Ho, comparing him to his vintage figure from 1983, and we have pro tips from a customizer on how to modify Gung Ho's vest to give him a more classic feel that you don't want to miss. Hey everyone, welcome back to Toy Habits, and today we are taking a detailed look at the Cajun bare-knuckle brawler known as Gung Ho, and we will also do a comparison with his vintage figure from 1983. And as always, let's first take a look at the packaging. Alright, let's first take a look at the box, and Gung Ho comes packed in the G.I. Joe Classified series window display, and looking at his box art, I really love the way that his face was drawn. I love the way that he is looking out into the distance, possibly surveying some of the damage that he's done. And I actually love the fact that this scene is a little bit dark. And the reason for that is if you were taking a picture of Gung Ho with a firestorm in the background, he'd actually appear a little bit darker in a photo. So I'm actually okay with that. One thing that I did notice is that his vest is colored blue, which doesn't really match his figure, but it goes along with the character pretty well. I love the art scene on the side of the box, and it just looks like Gung Ho is about to either advance his troops with a hand signal or stop his troops from advancing due to the firestorm that's surrounding him in the jungle. But what I did notice up here is that there are two what look to be Cobra Mambas, but I'm really not sure because there aren't two cockpits. There is a double tail here, but maybe it's the camera angle. So maybe some Mambas have dropped some incendiary bombs on Gung Ho, but that remains to be seen. I do really love the grizzled and just battered look on his face, and they just did a fantastic job with the art on the front of the box here. Let's take a look at the side of the box to find out what specialties Gung Ho possesses. Now, he is a level 3 jungle environment specialist, a level 2 in heavy weaponry, and also hand-to-hand combat, better known as fist bumping, and also a level 3 in combat. Alright, let's first take a look at Gung Ho's head sculpt with his hat on. Now, his hat is removable, and if you look closely, there are some chevron detail that you can see, and also the brim of his hat has some stitching on it. I think his hat is very well done, and looking at his head sculpt a little bit closer, I actually didn't realize that Gung Ho came with hair until I took his hat off, which is a nice surprise. I do really love his face sculpt, the way that he has very strong cheekbones, he's got a nice jawline, and his eyes are painted very well. They look very realistic, and they've even added some frown lines in his forehead to kind of give him a more grizzled and battered look. Now, throwing his hat back on, I do think his hat rests a little too high on his head for my taste. I think there's a lot of space here that could have been tightened up with a little bit larger hat that can sit lower on his head. And I think from the front it looks okay, but from a side view it doesn't look that great. Alright, let's take a look at his upper torso, starting with his vest. And his vest has a comm link on it, which you can find on other G.I. Joe Classified figures, as well as 3 grenades that are strapped to his vest. He also has a collar flare out near the top of the vest, and I actually do think that this collar is a little bit high. I actually wish that they would have cut it off at the line here because it just rests too high, and I don't like to hide some of the detail that you'd find on the neck or just kind of cover the face from certain angles. And although his vest is open, it looks like it's a bulletproof type vest, and I do like some of the carving detail here as well as the pouch detail. It just makes his vest look a lot more interesting from the front. And if you turn it around to the back, I love the way that they continued the silver details here, kind of highlighting some of the armor plating that he might have in the back of his vest. One aspect of Gung Ho's vest that I'm not super fond of is this shoulder armor that extends pretty far over his shoulder. It looks pretty Mad Max to me, and I wish they had cut it off at the seam where his vest starts. So what do you do if you absolutely hate Gung Ho's vest? Brandon Baumer, a customizer I recently met on the channel, used the phrase Mad Max to describe Gung Ho's Classified series look, and I completely agree with him. He did a modification to the vest to turn him from a Mad Max look to a version of Gung Ho that has roots to the 80s design. But how did he do this? To pull off this classic look, He first removed the hands to slide off the elbow pad and the forearm guards like so, and then he went to town on that shoulder piece. Then he used a heat gun to soften up the silver shoulder guard so it would separate more easily, and then he used an X-Acto knife to trim off that excess piece. This is a brilliant modification, and this is my favorite look for this figure by far, so thank you, Brandon, for the tips and for the distraction. Now back to the review. I do love the tattoo detail on his chest here, and I'm going to show you the vintage figure just for now a little bit early because it kind of mimics the upper tattoo of Gung Ho's chest in the vintage figure, which I think is brilliant. I love the way it's shaped, and it continues down into his abdomen from the middle of his chest. All right, let's take a look at Gung Ho's arms. Now, Gung Ho is jacked like Roadblock, which I will bring in a second because I have him on hand, but let's take a look at some of the detail and accessories that he has strapped to his arms. Now, he's got a removable elbow pad, which is very cool because you can actually take this thing off, which I'll show you in a second, and it doesn't really impede the articulation of the figure, so I think that was a great addition. And he does have a substantial forearm piece that is mounted to his arm, and this is also removable too, so I'm gonna show you what that looks like and pop that off in a second. All right, with just a quick pop of the hands, his elbow pad and forearm armor come off, and now you can see a lot better detail with his jacked arms. So looks like he shares a arm sculpt with Roadblock, which I will bring in here. And if you look at the striation detail on both of the arms and the biceps, it looks like they're exactly the same mold. Now I'm also going to attempt to take his vest off, but I'm not sure if I can. I'm not sure actually how to pop these arms off, and I don't want to break it, so hopefully he's articulated enough where the vest can slip off. All right, it wasn't too hard to get his vest off, so here is what his vest looks like when it's off. It just looks like a regular vest without Gung Ho in it, surprisingly. And here's what he looks like without his vest and all of his elbow pad and shoulder armor, and he's looking like Zangief from the Street Fighter series, so I think I might just keep his vest on, but you can kind of see the sculpting detail a lot closer, and you can kind of see the muscles that he gave him in his back, which you really don't see in a lot of these figures because they either have armor that's molded to their backs or their fronts, and some of the stuff is just not removable. And for me, I actually really like the look without his forearm armor and his elbow pad, so I'm going to keep this figure on display like so. And apologies in advance for the gratuitous crotch shot on Gung Ho, but this is the only way that I can look at his pants. So Gung Ho comes with a camo deco pant and a very cool removable and flexible piece that comes with smoke grenades. I'm not sure if I can get this off, but I am going to try and not to break the figure. So if I don't, oh well. I love all of the pouch detail that he has on his pants, and again, the texturing that they've used along with the varying colors in the pant really give these pants some definition, as well as coloring his knee pad black. I think that's a great idea. And looky that, those smoke grenades just came right off really easily. They just slid right down his leg and over his boot. So here's what he looks like without his smoke grenades on him, which were very easy to remove. And here's what Gung Ho looks like with all of his accessories that are removed from his body, and I actually think he looks really cool like this, but I do like his smoke grenades on his thigh, so I am going to put those back on. All right, and moving down to his boots, he does have silver shin armor that cover the front of his boots, and if you take a look at the shoe detail, there is tread on the bottom, and he has some laceless boots that he's donned here. And if we look at the back, you can see the strap detail that moves around the back, and also some riveting detail here on the shin armor. Now, before we get into the weapons, I'm going to take a look at his accessories that he came with that were attached to his body parts. So let's first take a look at his elbow pad. Now, I really love the design of this, as this part here is raised, which makes it look a lot more detailed and gives it a lot more definition. I also love the way that this was sculpted, and it just makes that elbow pad a lot more interesting. Here is a closer look at his smoke grenades, and again, there's a lot of detail in these smoke grenades. I love that there's some stitching here, and the clips that you would have on a normal piece that you would attach to your leg. He also has his forearm armor, and I'm really not sure what this is. Maybe it's a comm link or something like that, but I love the way that there is some extra sculpting detail up closer towards the end of his armor, and I just think this piece is really well done, and I love the way that the silver and the darker gray and the black just complement each other really well. It's getting very crowded on the acrylic display, but Gung Ho comes with 3 guns in a backpack, so let's take a look at the first gun. And like all of the G.I. Joe Classified series guns, there's a lot of detail etched in here. It's got a blunt front, which is probably signifies that might be a phaser rifle, and I love the handle detail here and also the detail on the barrel of the gun. I'm going to set this aside because this thing is just way too crowded. His next gun is a little bit longer version. It looks like a plasma shotgun with the pump action here, and just pointing out some of the really tiny details like the riveting here. Again, it's got a blunt front, it's got a little sight, and it's got some texture here on the handle. And here is his grenade launcher, which I think is a really amazing weapon, and it has a lot of detail. The revolver that carries all the grenades is really, really nice, and it looks like there's some armor to protect his hand, possibly from backblast from these grenades. And if you can see down the hole, it doesn't have a blunt front because grenades are round, and this is a grenade launcher. And finally, here is his backpack, and his backpack is really well done. I love the strap detail here and along the bottom. I love that the fact that these are kind of going in 2 different directions just to give the backpack a little bit more definition, and there are spaces to hold all of his weapons. So let's take a look at that in a second. So let's see how the guns actually plug into this one, and if you notice the spaces where the guns go, one has a small clearance here and the other one has a larger clearance. So let's take a look at the larger gun, and they're pretty easy to put in. You just kind of snap them in here and they hold in place. So here's the larger gun and here is the smaller gun, and I'm actually not sure why they included a piece up here to hold a gun, but you can't actually put all of the weapons on here like I thought. But maybe it's room for one gun, where if you want to just have a gun displayed in the back here. I'm not really sure. Now, it doesn't really look like it fits on, but maybe you can just manipulate it like so. But I'm really not sure if this will actually attach to his back because the gun handle is protruding so much. And here is Gung Ho all geared up, and he absolutely looks stunning with all of his weapons and accessories that are attached to him. And let me just turn this around here if I can, and if he won't fall over, you can see his backpack and his guns that are strapped to his back. I know this is a weird view, and no, I'm not doing surgery on Gung Ho, but something that I haven't mentioned in any other review that I've done so far is just how to get the weapons on these figures, because a lot of the clearance between the fingers and the weapons is really tiny. So what you're going to have to do is just stretch the fingers, and it's really a race to get the gun and the fingers to mate with each other, because if you notice, Gung Ho's hands close pretty fast. So let's see if I can do this right now. All right, I'm stretching his fingers out, and hopefully we can get his grenade launcher to seat in there. And, you know, I was a little too late on that one, so let's try again. And a lot of this is trial and error. You're not really going to break the figure, and I think what happens is, oh, there we go. You can, once you have these apart, you can kind of seat the gun and his hand together. All right, and finally, let's take a look at Gung Ho compared to his vintage figure from 1983. And the obvious similarities here are the vest detail, where they've retained the grenades that are on the 1983 version, and they just put a few more grenades up on his left shoulder here. Also, his tattoos are very similar, and like I mentioned before, this version of the tattoo is actually the top version of Gung Ho's whole tattoo, and I'm actually glad that they didn't put the whole tattoo on there because it would have covered up a lot of Gung Ho's ripped abs. And another similarity with this figure are the hats, and also Gung Ho has a very long backpack that extends above his neck to the middle of his head in the vintage figure, and they extended it a lot more in the classified line, but they look very, very similar to each other. All right, the last similarity I'm going to point out is obviously the camo in the pants, and moving on to the differences, really a lot of the differences lie in just the way that the vintage figure was colored versus the classified figure, and they used a lot of teal in the vintage figure, even on the backpack. And unfortunately, I don't have the vintage Gung Ho grenade launcher, but I will throw in an image here. But the grenade launcher from the classified series is just a beefed up version of the original weapon, which was a very cool addition to Gung Ho's figure in 1983. Those are the similarities and differences, and I really think this Gung Ho from the classified series looks fantastic and is a huge nod to the vintage figure. Gung Ho looks like he's ready to take on Cobra head on in the jungles of Cobra Island, and I love the way his guns, his pads, and his gear look on the figure, and there is a ton of display options with this one. Well, that's a wrap on Gung Ho, and let us know what you think. I'm impressed with this figure. Are you? Let us know in the comments below, and if you've made it this far, please hit the subscribe button to get alerted to new reviews we post on the channel, and thanks as always for tuning into Toy Habits.